video. So if you missed part of it, look at me. It's going to show about 5 or 6 times while we're talking tonight. I also want to correct one thing, first of all, and I know I'm going to disappoint a lot of people. It says Noah's Ark found. I have never made the claim to Dan that we found Noah's Ark. I made the claim that we found an enormous ship at 13,126 feet. And we have incredible scientific evidence that it's there. However, we don't have scientific evidence that it's Noah's Ark, because the scientists have come with 2 different theories on how that ship got there. There is one group of scientists, both believers and non-believers, who said it got there from a flood. But then there's another group who said that space aliens beamed it up. We've been getting emails from them. That's true. Well, October 26, 2005, a little less than a year ago, I was in Colorado visiting a friend of mine. We'd just gone to Morocco together. And when I got there, he says, Arch, he says, I have a friend of mine who's got some really good scientific evidence that he knows where Noah's Ark is. And I'm going to go. You want to come with us? I said, sure. Where is it? He says, 54 miles north of Tehran, Iran. I said, are you nuts? You know, who's going to go to Iran this day and age? Besides, it's not there. It's in Turkey. You know, it's on Mount Ararat in Turkey. Don't you read Genesis 4? And that's when the story started. He says, well, let me just talk to you about Genesis 4. Robert Cornuke was CSI, and for the few of you here who may not watch TV, as crime scene investigator, all biggest TV show going on right now, but he was CSI of Southern California for 18 years. So he's pretty good at investigation. About 23 years ago, he got involved with an astronaut named James Irwin, who thought they saw Noah's Ark from spaceship, from satellite on Mount Ararat. So that was one of his first of 10 trips that he went to Mount Ararat in Turkey looking for it. He went to every single spot on those 10 trips that anybody ever said, this looks like it could be Noah's Ark. Every time he got to the spot and took samples back, it was clearly rock. There was no wood there, it was clearly rock. So he finally decided that either Noah's Ark doesn't exist anymore on Mount Ararat, or that's not Mount Ararat. So he started doing some investigating. He found out that was the very first time that was named Mount Ararat. It was in the 13th century A.D. Marco Polo was going across eastern Turkey on his way to China. And he met some Armenians. The Armenians said, we think Noah's Ark is up in that mountain. Well, in Genesis 8, verse 4, it says, as the waters receded, the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. So Marco Polo wrote on his map, Mount Ararat. And from then on, that was called Mount Ararat. So in the last 100 years, there's been more than 1,000 trips taken to eastern Turkey looking for Mount Ararat. Well, once he started to think about, well, if that wasn't Mount Ararat, is there another place that was Mount Ararat? First, he started studying the Bible, and he already found 3 problems right away. One is Genesis 8, verse 4 says, when the ark came to rest, as the waters receded, the ark came to rest in the mountains, plural, of Ararat. Not on Mount Ararat, in the mountains of Ararat. When we were flying over eastern Turkey, the pilot said, if everybody looks out the right side of your plane, you'll see Mount Ararat. We just happened to be on the right side of the plane. On the plane, the ground was just a flat plain with one peak. And it's one peak, one mountain, volcanic mountain in the middle of an enormous plain, one peak, and that was Mount Ararat. So verse 4 says mountains of Ararat. Well, we don't have to go much farther because verse 5 says, as the waters continue to recede, as the waters continue to go down, the mountaintops of other mountains started popping up in view. Well, it couldn't happen there. There was no other mountains. Just side note, the mountain that we were on, Mount Suleiman, which, by the way, is the only mountain in all of the Middle East with a Hebrew name. It means Mount Solomon. But at that mountain, it's right in the center where there are 16 mountains over 14,000 feet where we're on. So those 2 verses make it pretty difficult for Turkey to have Mount Ararat. But then you don't have to go much further, because in Genesis 10, the last verse of Genesis 10 and the first two verses of chapter 11, it says, as Noah's sons came down out of the mountains, they went from the east to Shinar. Now, Shinar is Baghdad today. Well, if you get out your history or get out your geography books, you find out that, do my math backwards. If we have Turkey up over here and Mount Ararat up over here, Shinar, Baghdad's here, it's already west. So how can you come out of the mountain and travel from the east, which means west? You have to go all the way around the world to get to it. The Greek, the Hebrew, in fact the Greek is apo, which means from. The Hebrew, the King James, all say that Noah's sons traveled from the east. The American Standard Version and the NIV both looked at the map and said, someone interpreted the Bible wrong and changed it to line up with Marco Polo's map, and they say that Noah traveled eastward. I just talked to the publisher just this past week, gave me the new Bible, the new NIV that just came out last month, and they've since then corrected it. It now says Noah traveled from the east again. They found out those illustrations were wrong, but I thought it was interesting that they would correct the Bible to line up with Marco Polo, as opposed to, saying that Marco Polo must have been wrong. So at that point, we didn't know whether or not it was in Iran for sure, but we knew that for sure it was not in Turkey. Well, Robert had made quite a few trips in the Middle East, starting going through old museums. And he found an old map from somewhere between 700 and 900 BC that showed, from Arab explorers, that showed Noah's Ark just south of the Caspian Sea, which is northern Iran. And that region was called Ararat, by the way, in those days, in Bible days. Then he found another one from 1650 from French explorers that showed Noah's Ark, this is 1650 AD, in the same spot. Then in 1722, they found a map from English explorers, from British explorers, that showed Noah's Ark in approximately the same map, in the same area on the map. So that's how we started heading out to, and there's a lot more evidence on why it came, but because I have a short period of time tonight, I'm going to go into it more, but we had a pretty good indication that it was there. So then becomes the really big decision, probably the most difficult decision I've made in my 53 years, is do we go to Iran now? I have 4 grandkids. I know some of you guys probably have grandkids here. There's a few more gray hairs out here. And life is pretty comfortable. It's doing pretty good. My grandkids live right down the street from me, see them all the time. I got a great wife. We worked hard. We're starting to travel more. Life's pretty good. Do I want to go to Iran now? I have a friend who was the top guy at the Pentagon in charge of all the Middle East. And I had to go to Washington, D.C., so I went and visited him. And he's, by the way, he graduated from Assemblies of God Seminary, joined the Navy, became commander of all joint forces, air, land, and sea, in the Atlantic, which means Europe and the Middle East, Admiral Vern Clark. And he reported only to the President of the United States and Donald Rumsfeld, so all intelligence went through him. So I went to him and told him about our evidence, and I said, what do you think? Think we should go? He says, well, Arch, let's go over to the State Department and talk to them. He took me down to the State Department, which means we can get the top of the intelligence. He took me down there. And they said, well, Iran right now is the #1 nation in America that hates, and the world that hates Americans. They said it is the most dangerous place you can go to. If you remember the days of President Jimmy Carter, they took hostages. If they think that there's a chance that they're going to be going to war in America, they're going to want to take hostages to use them for negotiation. They said the best thing that could happen, of course, best things come back, but they said you could get killed, or worse, you could be taken captive and beheaded, or just, held there. So then I started thinking, well, what would be long for my wife? What happened to her? What would be with my grandkids if I didn't see them for years? And we had set a date in February, which we had a drop-dead date. Which just means drop-dead means we just made a decision by that date, whether or not we're going to go. Not that we dropped dead, hopefully. We had a drop dead date, and I was having lunch with a friend of mine, Norm Miller, and I hope you all have mentors in your life. So it's something that you talk through, you hold yourself accountability partners. And we had been praying about this for 2 months, and and I said, Norm, what do you think I ought to do? I said, on one hand, the editor of the National Geographic just a few years ago said, if Noah's Ark is ever discovered, it will be the most important archaeological discovery of all time. And it would forever change scientific thought. In the last 100 years, the most important biblical archaeological discovery has been the Dead Sea Scrolls. And yet 99% of the Christians don't know the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And yet everybody knows the story of Noah's Ark. The three biggest religions in America in the world, the three biggest religions have the story of a worldwide flood where somebody saved them. So it's there. And just talking to people about the possibility of going, you can see people's lights light up. Do you think it could be there? When I was having lunch with Norm that one day, he says, Arch, we've been friends for a long time, and he says, as a friend, I don't want you to go. But he says, if you feel God's called you there, I don't want you to stay home. But he says, don't go for excitement or exploration. Make sure God knows you. Make sure you know God's going there. You ever had this time where you think God's telling you that, but you don't know for sure? Well, I had one of those times, because there's just a lot at risk. So he said, well, Arch, for this morning, he says, this might help you. He says, I read my devotions this morning, it's John 17:4. He says, maybe that's your answer. I said, Norm, I have never memorized that verse. I don't know what that means. I said, I don't have my Bible with me. I don't want to wait till I get. Tell me what John 17:4. John 17:4 was the last prayer that Jesus had before he went to the cross. Every Easter you hear everything that Jesus said on the cross. But John 17:4, Jesus is in the pit. He spent his last night on earth in a pit. He's in a pit. He's saying his last prayer to God before he goes to the cross. And the prayer was, he says, Father, I have honored you here on earth. Some translations say, I have glorified you on earth because I have finished the work you've given me to do. I'm sure I've read that verse many times. But that time when I read it, it hit home. And I said, God, if this is the verse, if this is the answer, if this is work you want me to finish to do, there's only two reasons I wouldn't do it. One is because of fear, and the other one's selfishness. And neither of them are good answers. So I put out a fleece. State Department said it was really academic whether I wanted to go there or not because they never let me go there anyway. They never gave me a visa and a passport. So I said, God, I'm sending my passport. That was their day. If it comes back with a visa, I'm on my way. So I stuck it in my DHL. I downloaded their passport application or visa application off the internet, sent it to Tehran. 7 days later, I get a DHL package back. I opened it up. My passport is stamped with a visa. But by the way, on the application, it said, what's your purpose of your trip? I put down mountain climbing. I figured, So we're off the trip. So we get to Tehran. We land there at 2 o'clock in the morning. Actually, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock before we get to the hotel. We didn't want to be real visible, so we thought if we went there at 1 o'clock in the morning, we'd be less likely to be noticed coming through the airport. By the way, in the 12 days I was there, we never saw one white person in the entire 12 days I was there. So we got there. We got to our hotel about 2 o'clock in the morning. We all had decided that we were going to leave at 6 a.m. to head out of the city to go out there. Well, y'all remember the days of when our embassy was overrun 27 or 29 years ago? Well, when I got there at the hotel, I was checking the desk. I said, by the way, is that embassy still around? Whatever happened to our embassy? They said, oh, yeah, it's still there. It's a training camp now, but they said, I said, how do you get there? They said, if you go 2.5 blocks down the street, get on the subway, and then go three stops on the subway, get out, take a left, and it's right there. I thought, well, I wonder what it looks like today. So I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We weren't sleeping anyway because there were 9 time zone changes, so we weren't sleeping anyway. So I go down there and I walk down the street, I go down the subway, 2.5 blocks down the subway, train comes along, opens the doors, it's full of soldiers. I get on the train, subway, go down 3 stops, get off, walk up, and there is a huge walled place. And there's a plaque about this big around. It says Embassy, United States of America. Just as clear. It's now an army training camp for the Iranians. And I got up and I walked up to them. The guard was standing there like this. And I walked up. He looks like this. He says, "Are you Italian?" I said, "No." "Are you German?" I said, "No." "What are you?" I said, "I'm Texan." "Americana? We never see Americana." He said, "Never have Americana come here." So, but the people I found were very friendly. I got back at 6 o'clock and everybody was looking for me. So it's only 54 miles from there to base camp. It took us 9 hours to get there because winding roads up the mountains. The base camp was at 5,500 feet. It was 99 degrees at base camp. And we started up the mountain. When we started up the mountain, it was 99 degrees. When we started up the mountain, it was minus 20 at the top. It was kind of, if you can imagine packing stuff for that, carrying it up. And it's a really steep, difficult climb. But here's one thing that was interesting. Everybody I met in Iran spoke English. You know why? There are more Iranians in America than there are Iran. Everybody I talked to had been to America years ago or had uncles and aunts or cousins or friends or neighbors there, and everybody spoke English. It's amazing. So we get up in the mountains, we get up in the village, so to the base of the mountains, and we told them that, this area that we want to go up. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to back up a little bit more. Robert Canuck went and bought some pictures from the satellite, from the U.S., from NASA, for $5,000. You can buy region of the worlds, and he bought them, and they spent months going over them, and they found this object that looked like it could be it. So that's how we got to this valley that we're going to. So when we told our Sherpa, we had 5 Sherpas. We had a grandfather who is 75 years old, and we had his 2 sons who were in their 40s and 2 grandsons who were in their 20s. Now he's been guiding this mountain. This was his mountain. He's been guiding it his entire life. We were the only second white people he'd ever seen. The last ones were a group of Germans 35 years ago who came through there, and they didn't go within a mile of what we're going through. He said, "Where do you want to go to?" We said, "Well, we're going to go up there. We're going to go looking for an object." He says, "Noah's Ark?" I said, "You know about Noah's Ark?" "Oh, yes." They said, every many years, decades, it gets really warm out, and then the ice melts, and you can see it. And in 2005 was the first time that they had seen it. So thanks to this evil thing called global warming, it had melted up the mountain, so that in 2005, he says, "I can bring you right to it." So we head out that morning. We get to the base camp. We start hiking up, and it's approximately 9. I carry a GPS system, and I got one of these new Garmin GPS systems. In fact, they're so new, they weren't even in the stores yet. When the stores had told me about it, I called the factory, told them I was going to Iran, because there's a 3D one. Most of them will show you your route going this way, on a GPS. This one, you can turn it sideways and it'll show elevation down and around and this way. The entire trip. It's really cool. So and then it can mark spots. Every time you find something, you hit a button and it marks that spot on your way up. So as we're going up this trip, we're going this up, and we get to the first part, and he says, "Okay, now we're starting out at 5,500 feet. He says, "We're going to let you ride mules because the climb is very tough later on, so to save your energy, we're going to let you ride mules." Well, their saddles aren't quite like the ones we have in Texas. They are a foot wide all the way around. The mules are real skinny, but these saddles are so big around, it's like this when you're sitting on the saddle. And then as the mules walk like this, if you can imagine, sitting on the saddle is very exaggerated. So when you're walking up a cliff, the side of a cliff, and it looks like it's about 18 to 24 inches wide, every time the mule goes like this, you feel like you're leaning over looking down the cliff. Didn't take very long, we're all walking. I know you could trust those mules because they never fall off the cliff, but your mind just doesn't let you do that, When they first assigned me my mule, and I looked at those mules, they look pretty rough because they don't have much grass and stuff up there. I named mine Mercedes, thinking that, might improve the ride a little bit. Didn't help. So we start climbing up the mountain, and it was a real rough switchback mountains. And it was a very difficult climb. It was very obvious to see on the way up that nobody could have carried anything significant up the mountain. So one claim that nobody makes is that it was carried up there by man. And it's very difficult to see from that climb that it couldn't happen that way. We climbed through the tree line at 8,000 feet. After 8,000 feet, there's rock, a little bit of grass, some cactuses, and then about 10,000 feet, we hit ice and snow and glaciers. At 13,000 feet, we went over a pass. When we crossed over the pass, we could see it dropped down to about 11,000 feet and came up the other side, and right eye level with where we're at was the object that we had gone out there for. We've been climbing. Now this is altitude. You notice I'm not a marathon runner, right? So it was an extraordinary, exhausting climb. At that last part of it, it seems like we'd go 3-4 steps and stop and wait, because it was just, even the climbers, not the Sherpas, but the American mountain climbers, we had some young guys with us, they were really tired out. Have you ever tried to run like a 4-minute mile, or you had to chase something, or something was chasing you, and you ran, you feel your heart can never go any faster than it's going? When I came down that mountain to go across the glacier, to go up the other side, that's how I felt. My heart absolutely couldn't go any faster when it was going. But it did, because I fell through the glacier. And my legs were dangling like this. I caught my backpack caught me so that there was no water underneath. What had happened, it had washed underneath, so you could hear it. I couldn't see how deep it was, but you could hear it as everything fell down underneath. And my feet are dangling like this. My wife says it wasn't my backpack, it was my belly that caught me. But at that time, my heart was beating so fast, I didn't have any effort to do anything. You couldn't struggle. I think I sat there for probably 10 or 15 minutes because I didn't have any energy to even do anything. I just figured I'm just going to fall through and die here in a little bit, because it was snowing out too. But after a while, you get some energy. You just push yourself up and you crawl on the grass, on the ice glacier, and you crawl out to the edge. Right after we got off the glacier, we set up base camp. It's just about dark. It was starting to snow pretty heavy that night. And as we were setting up camp, getting camp ready, because that was our summit camp, we were only 1,000 feet under, but it was just about dark. We knew we couldn't make it. So what we thought is we'll get up about 8 o'clock in the morning, get a good night's sleep, rest, let our hearts slow down a little bit, and take off in the morning. And it was starting to snow pretty hard, and pretty soon we could only see from here to that wall. That's how hard it's snowing. And Minnesota, you've seen plenty of those kind of snowfalls. It was snowing about that hard, and the Sherpas were telling us that the last time that they were up there, 2 weeks ago, that they had some pack of wolves come up, and 30 feet from where we're at had killed the mule that they had with them. And they said 2 days before, on the mountain right next to them, they had 2 bears that came to their camp that morning. Didn't kill anybody, but they came in digging through the food. And then to encourage us more, they said, oh, see this mountain right over here? They said last summer, a guy was walking up the mountain over here, and this boulder comes rolling down the mountain, and he ducked, and it hit him right in his head and took his head off. And then he says, on that mountain right there, 2 years ago, a guy that we're with, he thought he really knew how to climb. He fell off and fell 1,800 feet. We never saw him again. This is why we're already up there. So then as all of a sudden, the clouds that was snowing start moving down the mountain. And as the cloud goes down the mountain, it looks just like the water receding from Noah. Because as the clouds went down, all of a sudden mountains start popping up all over. And all of a sudden, chapter 8, verse 5, that's what it looks like. Everywhere you look, mountaintops starting to pop over as the clouds went down the mountain. Now, this next part I can tell you, you'll here understand. We had a full moon that night. And when you have a lot of fresh snow on a full moon, how dark does it get? Not too dark. So even though it was night, we could see everywhere. And we're all sitting there talking. We're all so excited because we have so much adrenaline. We're 9-hour time zone changes. We're tired. We're so tired, but we can't sleep. You ever had that happen? You know, so pretty soon, I mean, you could hear everybody. I mean, if they were just, you know, making any kind of groaning noises or anything, everything happened. Pretty soon would say, you know, hey, Bob, you asleep? No. You know, and finally at 3 o'clock in the morning, the place we stayed at was a stone hut. It had been built, according to them, it had been many hundreds of years ago. No one knows when it was built, but it was at 11,000, maybe 600 feet over there. It was just a stone building. Obviously no electricity or water. It had been thousands of years old. It was just a stone shelter. Some shepherders had built it. So we're laying in there, and it has a big window, no glass or anything. The window's just an opening out. The lights all coming in, and Robert Carnook, the CSI guy, he's on the other side of that building. He says, Arch, I'm sitting over a rat. And even though it was that night, I can see the rat on the wall right next to him right there. It was just sitting there on a rock. And he follows its way around, climbs up the rocks, walks around the ledge, and comes back and sits this far from me. It's kind of cool, you know, watching that. So then about 3 o'clock, the sun starts coming up. Well, it never got dark in the first place. And it's so cold anyway. None of us took our clothes off. I mean, you're supposed to, you know, we brought all your thermal underwear, like I said. We were so cold. You know, we called in a sleeping bag with everything on. We're just freezing cold out there. But at 3 o'clock, the sun starts coming up. About 3:45, we had all agreed at 8 o'clock we're going to go up the mountain. But at 3:45, it was so light outside. Nobody was sleeping. Nobody was about to go to sleep. Let's just go up the mountain now. So we all packed up our gear. And we didn't take all our gear with. We just took the stuff that we needed to take, the tools. And we started climbing up the mountain. It was only 1,100 feet above where we're at. But it was on a rock slide. Have you ever tried when you're a kid, drive up a gravel hill? You know, you put your foot over here, it goes down. The next one over here goes down. On this landslide, it seemed like we climbed that thing 5 times because every time I put a foot down, it would go up. Plus, we're at 13,000 feet. Plus, we had backpacks on. It took us an hour and 38 minutes to go 1,100 feet. But when we got there, we saw some of the pictures that you'll see on here. We saw what looked like an enormous pile of lumber. It looked like an enormous pile of, like a building had collapsed. It was no longer in the shape of a boat because it had slid down the mountain. But it looked like it had slid down the mountain. I'm looking for a piece of paper. Can I have your program? If you can imagine, the reason we slid down the mountain because at 11,000 feet was where the altar was, right alongside the landslide. So right straight up on a solid piece of rock was where the altar was. And this had slid up, and if you can imagine a building sliding down the mountain, and then all of a sudden hits something that doesn't move, and it just kind of goes like this, you know, on top of each other. So it's all piled up. It's probably 80 or 90 feet high. But there's big sections of floors, sections of walls that obviously were all cut by man, and they looked like wood. That one wall was 12 to 15 feet high, 30 to 40 feet long, and when you walk up to it, it looks like you're looking at the side of a Spanish galleon. There's another picture if you go to one of our websites. It shows us sweeping stones off what looked to us like a deck. When we did that, it looked like a basketball court when you grew up with, except for it had grade. But it did not look like petrified wood. It looked like wood. See pieces like that? When you're looking at there in person, a lot of that did not look like petrified rock. It looked like wood. It didn't like petrified wood. It looked like real wood. All around where we're at, there's little pieces like this. Now I'm going to put this on the table when we're done over here because you can't see from where you're at. This is a seashell right over here. This, you can see sea anemone. We had all kinds of fossils everywhere, thousands, as far as we could see. There was seashells and fossils of sea animals there from a seabed. And there was barnacles on the ship, you know, peeled off. We took 16 samples back. We took 7 samples of the sea life, and we took 9 samples of the ship coming home. They told us ahead of time that, you know, in Iran, they believe that the Iranians believe that Iran is the center of the world, that all humankind started in Iran. They believe the Garden of Eden was there. They believe Muhammad started there. Everybody believes it started there. Consequently, they revere artifacts as national treasures. They would rather you steal bars of gold than any of their artifacts. So the penalty of taking an artifact out of Iran is life imprisonment, if you're lucky, beheading, if you're not. So there was 15 of us on the trip. We had historians, we had archeologists, we had geologists, we had a biblical historian, and we had 3 doctors. And we had me. And, everybody can understand the purpose. And I jokingly, when we're sitting in the camp that night, when we're up in the mountain, it was the middle of the night, and we're all talking, we decided, are we going to try to smuggle any of this stuff out, or what are we going to do? And one of the guys said, well, there's no use all of us taking stuff out. How about if we just have 2 guys? Because if there's 15 of us, if everybody gets caught with something, then we're all taken away. But if only 2 of us, so I found my job. I became a mule. And so we carried it out, and we stopped, I put it in my duffel bag, my backpack, and hid in all different places, but we came back. But here's one more thing. Before I get off the mountain, I want to tell you this part of it. As we're going up that last 1,000 feet to the mountain, birds started swarming. Just birds, flocks of birds started coming up. Remember, the tree line is at 8,000 feet. We're at 13,000 feet. Flocks of birds start coming up, and I started taking pictures of these birds. There's birds I had never seen before. There was a beautiful bird. It was a black bird, a little bit bigger than our blackbird, and had tiger stripes, bright orange tiger stripes all over the bird. I go on the internet, look at Audubon and all sites of birds, and there aren't any birds like that. So unique birds. Then we get on the deck of this ship, and waves of butterflies come. Clouds of butterflies started coming up. You could see them come up the valley. Clouds of butterflies. You ever see monarchs when they fly in clouds? And again, we took pictures of them, and you go back and look at pictures of butterflies now, and there's no butterflies that look like it. So they were unique to that valley. So we come down out of the mountain, and we get back home, and I'm going to have to speed up a little bit over here. And we have all these artifacts, and we decide now, what is the best way? Because we feel that God has brought us here for a purpose. To go up the mountain, to come back, it's for a purpose. God didn't go just to come back and tell people, hey, I found Noah's Ark. There's a purpose for this. So we took the pieces that we had. We took the ones that had the fossils of the sea life. We sent them to places that study sea life. We took the pieces that appeared to us to be wood, and we sent 2 of them to the labs that the Smithsonian uses. Now, this is not Smithsonian labs. They don't have their own labs. They send them out. We sent them to the same labs as Smithsonian uses. We sent other pieces to the lab. We sent 5 other pieces to the lab that NASA uses. And then we sent other pieces, actually sometimes the same pieces, we get them back, send them out to the next one to 2 geological universities. 5 out of 5 of the labs that we sent them. These are the top geological universities in the country. 5 out of 5 said that the pieces that we had are the petrified remains of an ancient ship. The reason they said that was because when they took slices off, put them under the microscope, you saw there the cell structure? You saw that? Okay, rock doesn't have cell structure. Only petrified wood does. So the first thing they could tell us is it truly was petrified wood of unknown origin. They didn't know what kind of wood it was, but it was unknown origin. Secondly, on 2 of the slices, when they sliced it open, they found out there was sea life that had burrowed itself into the wood and got petrified along with it. And they said in order for sea life to get buried into the wood, it had to be in the sea for months. It didn't float for a couple days or a couple weeks. It had to be in there for months. Now, we didn't tell them what we thought it was or where we found it. All we just took the samples and sent to them and said, tell us what this is. And the third reason was because some of the pieces that we brought back were like this. They looked like wood on the outside, but they're pitch black. Well, when they tested them, they said they were soaked in a petroleum-based pitch to make them waterproof. So because of that, they said we had the petrified remains of a ship. One of the guys from the NASA lab called about 3 weeks later. I just happened to be on the phone with Robert when he called, and Robert gave me the phone. So he calls and he says, Mr. Bonnema, he says, I had a couple questions for you. I sent you my lab report already when I had it back. But I got some questions for you. He says, where did you find that rock? I said, in northern Iran. It's kind of quiet. He said, what elevation did you find that at? I said, 13,126 feet. He's quiet. He says, well, sir, I think I'm holding the very first piece of gopher wood seen by modern man. Because gopher wood doesn't exist. Did you all know that today? The Bible says it was made of it. So when he said that, I knew that he knew what we thought was what we had found. So, and a couple weeks later, now we're in mid-July, I get a call from Cambridge University, professor at Cambridge. I was with Robert Canuck, and he gets this call. And the professor starts out the telephone conversation with, I watched you on CNN, and I watched you on Fox News, I watched you on ABC, I watched you on CBS, and I'm not a Christian, I don't believe the Bible, but I thought you might find this interesting. We just finished checking the DNA of grapes. The oldest grapevines in the world come from the same valley you found that ship. Now if you go back to Genesis 8 again, verse 4, the ark comes to rest. Verse 5, the waters receded. Shortly after that, Noah comes off the ark, builds an altar, sacrifices the animals, the rainbow comes out. And verse 20, Noah plants a vineyard. About a week later, we get a call from another lab. And he starts out the same way. He says, I've been reading those articles on the internet about you, and I'm not a Christian, and I don't believe the Bible, but I thought you might be interested in knowing. We just checked the DNA of horses. He said the oldest DNA of horses in the world come from the same region where you found, that big ship. So I thought, isn't it interesting that God is using the non-Christians to validate what he's provided for us? So while we cannot say, I cannot say, we found Noah's Ark, we want to give the evidence to the people who say it is, because we don't have any proof it's Noah's Ark. Because it could have been beamed up. I mean, that's what some guys say. But here's what we're going to be doing next is we are making a video. In this video, we are flying to the scientists who wrote the lab reports of what we have. We made 23 hours of video of our climb. We have 1,000 pictures. We have all our samples. So we're making a documentary on the discovery of a ship at 13,000 feet in northern Iran. And then we're going to say, what was this ship? Because we want this to be debated in universities, in high schools, all the places that you couldn't put a religious video. But what's the answer they're going to come to? Even the non-Christian scientists, there's only a few crackpots out there who said that it was beamed up by idiot. Even the other one said, well, there must have been, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in the Bible, but there must have been a worldwide flood that caused it to float up there. But I've run into so many people in this last short period of time who said, if that's truly is Noah's Ark, then maybe the rest of the Bible's true too. And I'll comment, and if the rest of the Bible is true, the rest of the Bible includes Jesus is coming back again. I have been on many TV shows, many radios. In fact, I'll be in, if you listen to Word Radio or Salem. Yeah. What? You want to touch it?
I have to go pick up my son.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to miss it.
I'm going to place this on the table over here for the rest of you who want to see it afterwards, along with these rocks where you can see, all the other stuff. And I'm going to set them on the table over here when I get done over here. But I'll be on Salem Radio 10 o'clock Monday morning. It'll play in different times around the country. But the point I was trying to make was I've had many, many interviews. One question that comes up, every single reporter that I can remember has asked me the same question. Only one has ever printed my answer. Because the question that they always raise is, Noah's Ark, it's supposed to be 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. Why you and why now? Well, I don't really have a good why you, except for, all through the Bible, God uses people who nobody ever heard about. They were, I mean, we had sheep herders. Actually, we had several sheep herders, but, and I was pretty much a nobody. Before this happened, no one really knew me. So I fit that mold. But the second one, I said, the why now, I said, I think I do have a good answer for. And that's, I believe Jesus is coming back again real soon. And if he is, he's going to want everybody that can to come with as possible. And he wants to give out every evidence. Remember the story of doubting Thomas? When Thomas doubted and Jesus came and gave him the proof, what did he say? He believed, right? And then Jesus said, blessed are you because you have seen and you believe. Even more blessed those who believe without seeing. But still the people see and believe. Okay? So that's why we want to do this. Because some people will see and believe. And I believe that this fits in with Jesus coming back again soon. The whole story of Noah's Ark is real interesting. But it's not the most important ark. There is more and more important ark. This ark saved Noah and his family for a couple hundred years. They lived about 200 years. Well, some a little longer than that, but just a few hundred years, that's all. The more important ark is Jesus Christ. Because he carries us on for eternity. Dan said earlier that Sherry and I used to be counselors on the phone. Sherry, stand up a second. I'm going to tell a quick story about her. Okay, this was 30 years ago. Okay, so a long, long time ago. Love Lines was just getting started. My brother had got me introduced in it. And one night, Sherry and I, when we lived in Princeburg, Minnesota. Anybody here even heard of Princeburg? Yeah, 450 people, 120 miles that way. Well, west, whatever way, west. In a building hard to tell. Long ways away. But we come out here on Saturdays, we'd do the telephone lines. One Saturday night, Sherry had a call. Some guy called, a young man, and he said, I was just ready to commit suicide. And the Scott Ross show came on. And I heard someone say that if you needed help to call. So I'm calling. Give me one reason why I shouldn't commit suicide. Sherry said, well, 18 months ago, our first son died. He said, died of pneumonia. And she said, our second son is now in Hennepin General. They said, doctors give him less than 1 in a million chance to survive. She said, you want to give your life away for nothing? She said, we are fighting for life. Life is too valuable to give away for nothing. A little later, he became one of the 28,000 who prayed to receive Christ for Sherry. For Sherry. That was 30 years ago, and there's been tens of thousands left. And even back then, Dan, we had phone lines ringing with nobody answering them because we're short on volunteers. So we have 15 minutes on the clock left because I told him that I would have a chance at the end to answer some questions. I'm going to give 10 minutes over here. So if you all have any questions about my trip, about Noah's Ark, about the evidence that we found, we have a few minutes. Oh, that's a good one. There's one website called arcfever.com. There's actually a whole bunch of websites, but if you go to arcfever.com, you can download these pictures and a lot more of them that were up there. It'll also tell the story. That's BASE Institutes. BASE is Biblical, Archaeological, Scientific Expeditions. And you go to the website, and you can download the pictures and the stories, and as more evidence come out. But that's arcfever.com. Another really good one, though, is CBS11TV.com. Now that one, when you go to it, you type in the search engine, then you type Noah's Ark, or Noah's Ark Bonnema, because there's more than one Noah's Ark story out there, and you'll find out the story that gives a different aspect of our trip on there too. That's a really good one too. The first one was arcfever.com. The second one was cbs11tv.com. And then you go to the search engine and you put Noah's Ark and then my last name, Bonnema, Bonnema, and you come up with a story where we talk a lot about it. Our goal is that we've only told you a tiny bit of the evidence that we have, because next spring we'll have the movie come out. I want to read you an email that I got yesterday. Tuesday night I was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I get a call. And you all had this call before. He says, and he just kept on. He says, we talked back in May, and you told me about this trip that you're going to Iran. He said, did you make the trip? And I said, yeah. He said, well, tell me about it. So I gave him a brief overview, and he says, well, Arch, I'd like to help you make that. He said, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do next? I said, we're going to make a video documentary on the movie. And he said, well, I'd like to help you with that. He said, I've had some experience, not in making movies, but in public relations, and I'd like to help you with that. Do you have an email that I'd like to give you some ideas? I said, yes. And I gave him an email address. Yesterday morning, I get this email. I want to read this to you. I think this is really interesting. He says, Arch, the more I think about this, the more impressed and amazed I am with respect to your discovery. I can't imagine that this wouldn't be the biggest story in recent history and deserve all the appropriate, dignified coverage worthy of such an incredible accomplishment. Not to mention the spiritual and social movement and the inspiration this type of validation would create to all believers and non-believers alike. We would have a team available to help you, quote, tell the story in an unprecedented, non-traditional means if you want to discuss it further. My 20-plus years in the corporate world defending and building strong, credible brands that were often demonized for the wrong reasons could be useful as you move forward. But more importantly, it would be an avocation to help you more than anything else. Thanks for remembering our acquaintances. I'd love to be assistance in any manner. And he has phone numbers. I called him. But the fact that this story would capture, and then he called him. He says, I was embarrassed. I can't remember his name from the first time. He says, Arch, he says, what you don't know is I just retired after 30 years. He's young. He's only about 57 years old. He said, I just retired in September. And he says, I've always wanted to do something really big. And he says, this sounds like it could be really big, and this is what I want to do. So I thought it was cool. Yes? Hey, the question was, first question she had, was it dated? And the second question was, tell about the altar. No, we cannot, because once it becomes petrified and turns to rock, you cannot carbon date rock. So we would have liked to, because that would solve a lot of questions, but that does bring up something. Because we've had some scientists say that it takes 30 million years, or one guy said 50,000 years, for wood to petrify. So it can't be, Noah's Ark was 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. So this is a geologist, by the way, who sent this. Well, the geological lab from the Smithsonian, NASA, all of them have told us the story that there was two recent incidences. One in 1964, there's a great earthquake in Alaska. A tsunami went way inland, up in the mountains, 75-foot waves went way inland in the mountains. Oh, it was bigger than that. And in the valleys where the salt water settled under the trees, that was 1964. They're pulling out trees now that are petrified from 1964. Other scientists have also called us to tell us, and these geological bad backed it up, that Mount St. Helens, 1979, even newer. Some of that was buried by the volcanic ash, that wood is petrified already. And by the way, it carbon dates 30,000 years. But it was carbon dated from that. So as far as carbon dating, while it works in some things, it's come a little bit less predictable in some others. And the other question was the altar. We had one TV, I'm going to say TV camera, one 3-trip camera with us on the trip. He did not go up to the altar. We had split up because when we got to the summit camp, part of the group went up to 15,000 feet and the other part went up to the other one. They took lots of still pictures. They didn't take any video pictures. We took still pictures. But basically what that looks like is it's now a pile of rock. The reason we can tell there was a huge earthquake in the year 2000 AD. I mean, just like 6 years ago. It killed 60,000 people in that region. And it shook everything. That's this landslide. The natives told us that this even slid down quite a bit from then. The mountain climbers that were climbing with. But the reason we know it was an altar, it was because the way the wood was placed there, and there's lots of broken pottery there. Where people had when Noah came off the ark, he probably stayed there for a little while, but they didn't use the altar one time and go down the mountain. He probably stayed there for a little while. But there's a lot of broken pottery, and the wood that was burned, the parts that didn't burn had petrified. So it looked like a firewood. You see firewood 2 days later? That's what it looked like. And we have pictures of that. That'll all be in our documentary. One reason we're not putting it all out on the webpage and everything right now is because if we piecemeal the story out, then everybody will think they heard of everything by the time it comes out. So we're trying to gather all the evidence, all the scientific evidence, everything he had to make the movie so that it will be extraordinarily convincing even to the most skeptic when they see it. When these get to the universities, we want them to think that the only logical reason that ship could be there was because of a worldwide flood, a flood that went up to at least 13,000 feet. And what's the only recorded history of a flood? Noah's Ark. So that's another reason why we're not claiming this is Noah's Ark, is because we want everybody to discover to themselves that this is Noah's Ark. Any other questions? Yes, sir. We have no idea. It's covered up with snow by now again. In the third week of July, I was on the front cover of the Persian Times, which is Iranian's national newspaper. A friend of mine who reads which I don't, but emailed me the picture, the whole story. I was on the front page of it and half a page on the second side. It talks about a Texan explorer. Now, most of our guys are not from Texas. They're from Colorado. They're from all over, but somehow they're using my name on it. So they said that I couldn't have possibly, this Texan claims that he found a ship at 13,000 feet. And we can tell by looking at his pictures that couldn't possibly be wood. It's just rock that has the appearance of wood. Because it's impossible for a ship to run aground at 13,000 feet. So, but I know that the State Department has said that, unless we have like what Saddam Hussein, if we have a regime change. But right now there is, if I went to the country, I would be locked up. So we can't go back to check now. We're hoping that sometime, President Ahmed Jihad, who is the President Tom, as people call him, he's probably one of the most, between him and Chavez, and President Kim are the three most anti-American guys that there are out there. But if hopefully that they have enough other stuff going on right now that no one's going up there and raiding it. We don't have an idea what's happening up there right now. The State Department obviously will not let us go and look at their pictures that they're having out of it right now, so we don't know. It's interesting though, when we're leaving town going up there, we got within about 3 or 4 blocks of their nuclear plants where they're making all this, the nuclear fuel right now, and the bus driver talked about it. Hey, you're reading all the news about it, right there. Of course, there's a cooling tower, so I'm driving right by it. And this is really interesting too. They have, when you travel through rural America, you have billboards. They got about double the amount of billboards that we have. Neon lit signs. Tehran is very different than Baghdad. It's a very modern city. They have a lot of oil money. It's a very modern city. Downtown Tehran does not look much different than downtown Minneapolis. The skyscrapers, the glass, the everything. Their subways are the finest in the world. I mean, they're pretty new too. But it's all granite. When you go down the subway, it's all brand new polished granite. And then these beautiful French trains come through here. Also, most of the cars are Peugeots, which are also French. So I thought it was interesting that all the vehicles are French. But they're really very, very modern over there when you come up. So a war with Iran will be very different than a war, with Iraq. It's just totally different. Our military says it's at least times 10, the difficulty it would be to take them on. But if there is a regime change, we'd like to go back up. Yes?
There's supposed to be another gold found in Turkey. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Did you see the pictures of it? The question was, there's supposed to be another ark found in Turkey. That one is kind of a joke. The guy who found that, Robert, had met him on some of his trips over there. His ark looks like a Viking ship, pointed on both ends, and it's only about 1/4 of the size of what the Bible says Noah's Ark, and it's intact. Of course, it's made out of mud too. There's no wood on it, and he charges tourists $1,800 to go see it. So, but that particular one is so. There is no ark in Turkey that has wood. There's still some boulders that Robert's went to that from the spaceship and even from a helicopter look like approximate dimensions of the ark, but he's been on the site. Every one of those was rock formations. And even James Irwin, when James Irwin went there, Robert was with him, the astronaut, who went there in person. He said, we're 100 feet away, and James Irwin turned around and said, it's not the ark, it's rock. I have time for one more question. Yes, sir. Yeah, the comment he just had wasn't a question, a comment. He read recently that in all the Middle East, the people that love America the most are the Iranians, not the leaders of the country, but absolutely I found that true. Everywhere I went, people come up to apologize to me for their leaders. And they say, we love Americans, we have relatives, we wish we could go to America. We'd give anything to go to America. I was going to tell you about those lights, those signs, I forgot. 2/3, 2 out of 3 of every sign out there is anti-American. It's Statue of Liberty with a death mask on. It's bombs landing on America. It's our flag burning. This is government propaganda. And yet the people love Americans. Everywhere I went, people had to tell me how much they loved Americans. And it would be a shame if we go to war, Israel goes to war with them, if we have to for our defense, because the Iranian people love us. Their leadership hate us, but the people don't. But the propaganda that you see over there, it's just unbelievable that there is so much anti-American and anti-God propaganda, anti-Christian. There's just as much anti-Christian as there is anti-America. And you know what? You don't see any. We hear in the news of their hatred towards Israel. We didn't see any anti-Israel. And I commented that to one of the guys that was leading our group with the Iranians, and he says that's because Israel is the little Satan, America is the big Satan. So. Well, I'm going to put these rocks on this table over here. If someone else can come over and help them, I'll be available to answer any questions you have afterwards. But thank you, and thank you, Dan, for working with Love Arts.